And if everybody could be thinking about them overnight, we will try to get those done tomorrow. So here's the situation. Goal E is a big one, and we may even decide, talking about Goal E, that we need to have another council meeting in the near future to work on that. But depending upon how that goes, John and Martha are only available tomorrow from about 11 to 1. And so we're sort of in a position of we work a little bit later than 5 o'clock, what we planned, so that we can get out of here a little earlier tomorrow, or at least meet John and Martha's schedule, or we just cut it off at 5 and then hope for the best tomorrow. But Goal E is a big one, and I'm a little concerned about having enough time to discuss it. So, but whatever the council's pleasure is, we can do. I'm okay with going past 5 today. Will anybody else have a conflict or not really like that?
I just need to leave at 5 for a couple of minutes. So no.
Okay.
Or eat.
I'm on call, so I have to.
I think 5's it.
Okay, so the council consensus is 5 o'clock. We're pretty much bailing. Yeah. Look. Well, I'm hearing.
I mean, do we have a quorum?
Well,
Yeah, we will be.
will we have a quorum? Is the
I
question.
think I was the only one, right?
Yeah,
We will.
Okay. Okay, then we're going to keep turning and burning here.
See how it goes.
And overnight, if there's other goals, remember, we'll try to get those tomorrow. And now Director Guerrero is coming in. We just volunteered to go till 9 o'clock tonight. So, yeah.
I think he said at least 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll turn it back over to John and let him take us into Goal E. And if there's any trauma committee folks standing around out in the hall still, they want to yank it, somebody wants to yank them in here, that'd probably be a good thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And may I just ask, I just stepped outside during the decision about this afternoon. Could you just remind me of what that decision was? I just didn't hear. Was 5 o'clock the stopping point?
We're going to go past 5 o'clock. I believe Dr. Eastridge has to leave, and we'll still have a quorum, though. And,
Okay.
Karen has to step out for a couple of minutes, but I don't think any of us want to go till 10 o'clock or anything like that. I was just kidding about that, but we can go past 5.
Maybe 9:45 or something, perhaps. So anyway, well, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. So Goal E, just as a reminder, is to update the existing EMS and trauma plan. It's a document that has not been looked at in quite a while. So we wanted to spend just a little bit of time just setting the background for this so we're all on the same page. So there's a couple things that we would like to do before we actually get into the discussion of the council's thoughts of how to go about this process of updating the EMS and trauma plan. We'd like to just review a little bit of the background for this, talk about the proposed process and timeline for developing the EMS and trauma plan, and maybe just talk a little bit about the 2010 American College of Surgeons assessment and recommendations as they relate to the EMS and trauma plan. And I'm going to turn it over to Jane, maybe just to say a few words about the trauma plan and the timeline and process and the ACS, if that's okay.
Okay. When you go back and look at the trauma system plan from 2000, 2002, that document, there's a lot of information in there that I don't know if you want to revisit that or may not be relevant today. If you fast forward to the 2010 American College of Surgeons assessment, remember in 2010 the college came in and they did a statewide assessment. And so that was really an assessment of the state and how we function as compared to the HRSA Model Trauma System Plan that was developed in 2006. So when the original strategic plan was done, that document wasn't available, so that may play into your discussion and how you want to work. The a college assessment, in all of their findings and scorings, they actually use the benchmark indicator and scoring tool that is embedded into that HRSA document to do our assessment and then consultation. So out of that came this very large report from the college, along with 13 priority recommendations that the state should consider implementing. So the complete document, or the complete report from the college, I think is 118 pages. And that has already been through the process of the committees of GTAC coming together and meeting and going over that document, recommendation by recommendation from the college. And that actually has information gleaned from those committee meetings and from the department's perspective, and that's color coded. I think I sent you that document to. No, I guess I didn't. I see this question on Dr. Greenberg's face.
I pulled it up.
You pulled
Which
it
one?
up?
Are you talking about the ACS or the Texas Tech?
ACS. Mhm.
I have the ACS one here. I can forward.
Okay, and we can put it up on the screen. But the color coding, the different, I think it's green for the committee responses and blue for the department responses. So that could be a starting point for you. In the priority recommendations that the college had for the state, we've actually gone through the process of kind of updating those with the college. So we've actually accomplished some of those, and we're in the process of doing some others. One of the things that we're in the process of doing is preparing to do the 22 regional assessments, which would be similar to what the college did at the statewide level. Questions? Need more?
So, what we have is the strategic plan for the Texas EMS and trauma system was from December 2002. And I think council can either take that document and revise it and update it in its format, and maybe John was going to cover this, or we can chunk the whole thing out and take the work that Jane's just describing and incorporate that into a more, John, you may be able to explain it a little better than.
Sure. So I think there's a couple issues. So there's the current strategic plan. I think in discussions previously, not only with the council but with DSHS, I think folks recognize that it's time to revise this plan. The question is how would you as a council like to go about doing that? Let me be clear on what I think we're not doing here today. We're not creating the plan here today. We're not revising the plan here today. I think it's to get your input as a council about how you would like to go about this process, because as it's been indicated, the MS and trauma plan is a pretty big deal for the state of Texas, and it's not only going to require the considered input of the council, but also of stakeholders throughout Texas as well too. So we want to have kind of as a starting point here today to really understand from you all about what you think is important. And so on slide number 8 at the bottom of page 4, and that's put on the screen for the benefit of folks here in the room, there are 4 questions that we would kind of like to ask of you all here today to get the ball rolling, so to speak. What should be included in the plan? That is the level of detail. As Jane just mentioned, there were recommendations that came out from the ACS that you may think are appropriate and are a sufficient level of detail that should be included. You all will have your own ideas, I think, as a council. I think stakeholders will also have some input on that as well, too. I think we'd also like to know what and how should the GETAC committees be involved in the development of this plan. Number 3 is how should other stakeholders be involved in the development of this plan? And again, then thinking about recent and ongoing activities related to the ACS assessment and the RAC assessments that are taking place, how can this be used in the development of the plan? So these are kind of 4 questions we have. I am going to move to the next slide for a second before I come back, because you all may remember this slide, or a version of this slide, when we conducted the council's strategic planning 2 years ago, is talking about what a strategic plan is and what is an operational plan. Typically, a strategic plan looks at four things: the vision, mission, goals, and objectives. I believe, Dr. Tyrock, you talked about the vision and the mission earlier related to GETAC, and the comment was the mission of GETAC is what's in the EMS and trauma plan. But a strategic plan typically will include the vision, mission, goals, and objectives. And I'm going to read through these really quickly because I think it's important for you all as a council to consider these items, if not only how they're defined, but if you think that this is the type of level of detail that you would like to get at in the strategic plan. And then I'll mention a little bit about operational pieces, about how that would be implemented as a separate step. But a vision is the picture of the desired future. It's what the future will look like if you achieve the ultimate aim. So, not to be presumptuous about what that would be for the vision, but I would assume it would be a vision of, if you do X, Y, and Z, trauma EMS care will look like X, A, B, or C in the state. The mission is a statement about the overall purpose of the entity or organization, and it's going to describe what you do, for whom you provide services, and the benefit, and that would really be supporting your vision. Probably the two main things that are more detail-oriented in a strategic plan would be goals and objectives. Goals are those broad long-term aims that define the accomplishments of the mission. So you said this is what we do, how we're going to do it. The goals are going to define what those accomplishments would be. And then the objectives are going to be specific and quantifiable targets that measure those accomplishments of a goal over time. So your goal may be to increase, trauma care in the big cities. Well, your objectives to do this would be A, B, and C. They would be SMART objectives: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time. Yes, I always forget one of the letters off of this acronym. And so one of the things we would ask for you to consider in this discussion today, and as we get public comment, is this the type of level of detail that you would like to see in the EMS or trauma and EMS strategic plan? Making the assumption that these are the things that you would like to see, once this process is completed and you have your strategic plan, then other work would need to take place to operationalize it. So you said, we're going to do this. This is how we're going to do it. This is what we want to achieve. These are our objectives. You would then develop strategies and tactics, and maybe those go to some of the committees to do. Maybe you work with partners to do, stakeholders to do those things. But I think what we're suggesting today, at least as a starting point for this discussion, is the mission, vision, and goals and objectives the level of detail you would like to see. We're not necessarily asking you what those goals would be or what those objectives would be. I think if you're able to come to some agreement as a council on this level of detail, then some of the next steps would be to figure out how we would get input to make that happen. So I'm going to move back then to the next slide, just so folks can see the questions on the screen. But again, looking at what should be included in the plan, the level of detail, how should the committees be a part of this, how should stakeholders be a part of this process, and how should the ACS assessment and RAC assessments inform this process. So that's kind of what we would like to do. I'd like to ask the chair and the council if you have specific questions or comments generally before we get started, but then I would propose we kind of go through items 1, 2, 3, and 4 just to get your feedback. But okay. Chief?
Well, let me just say that this thing that we're going to do as a council is a really, really big deal. This thing is one of our legislative charges that we need to give back to the legislature, so that when stakeholders say we need X and Y and Z in Texas, we've got that in our strategic plan for the state of Texas. And the first one we had was I think was an excellent document, particularly knowing how the GETAC system evolved at that time, around 2001, 2000, and came out with a lot of great ideas. So we get into other issues such as time. If we want to get this done and ready for the next legislative session, we would have to get this whole thing done by our November, December, which we're not going to necessarily rush, but these are just things for council to consider. If not, then certainly we wouldn't want to take more than 18 months, because this is something that could be something that drags out on and on and on until and keeps getting massaged until we think we get it right. So it's going to take a lot of work from not only the council but from the stakeholders. So that's why we're trying to we're trying to plan how to do the plan and get input. So go ahead.
So since our original strategic plan was well accepted and everybody bought into it, and now we've had the luxury of having the ACS review, seems like we have a natural template in the document that we already have, and just apply the relevant and realistic concepts that the ACS has given to us with enough granularity that I think if you apply a little bit of granularity to it, that can potentially help direct our subsequent regional visits and identifying, areas for improvement in the state. So, I mean, that would be my recommendation is, not recreate the wheel. Sounds like we have a good document, but just augment it with, the best practices that the ACS has given us with their review.
I'm not sure necessarily that the existing document has the format that John's outlined, which is neither here nor there, but so I'm not sure how much we could apply the ACS into the existing document in its current format. That would be something to think about.
And one suggestion you may want to consider is a couple things. Is one, I think, Chief Riley, you've mentioned, the evolvement of the trauma care system in Texas since the first plan was developed. And I should have brought my copy. I have a copy in my office that I reviewed yesterday and again this morning. And so it was more of a high level. We ought to do this type of activity rather than saying this is the goal we have, this is what we expect to achieve from it. And I think, using the ACS as a starting point, I think, as you mentioned, can be very helpful when you go out and get stakeholder input, because you're not starting from scratch, but you have a framework where you say, these are folks who did this assessment that, that we felt was important, and these are some suggestions they had. So I think it is a little bit of the combination, but I think, to me, the main takeaway from your point, Doctor, is that you want to have something to go out with and start with rather than just starting from scratch in order to help inform and move the process.
That's exactly my point. I think we already have very solid infrastructure elements to develop this.
I think he's right. I mean, I came back to Texas in '97 and saw what a difference it was even then, but the document in 2002 was a very good document. It's definitely outdated, of course. It's 12 years old. The ACS document is outstanding. I've read it several times. I've met with Jane on it. I like it because it's got the HRSA model, and I think we really need to use that very much to our benefit as much as we can. I mean, this is going to be a very robust project. It's going to require the stakeholders and the committee work, but I really think we need to strongly rely on the ACS personally.
They're just general comments from council members before maybe we just go one by one. I think you've addressed some of these comments of the four main points, but are there other just general comments before we get started?
Was the 2002 document not disseminated? I'm on the website and I can't find it.
It's on there.
It
Go to
is?
strategic planning documents on the main web page,
The main DSHS webpage or the GETAC webpage?
the GTAC web page.
And apologies for not having disseminated this. I think the discussion earlier about the documents and resource documents, I think this is another example of maybe some of the frustration that is felt with this.
Yes, it is on the GTAC web page, and you scroll all the way down to
Strategic planning document.
strategic planning documents, and then if you click on that, the first thing under strategic planning documents is a strategic plan.
Starla? I mean, would you mind just bringing it up? I don't know. We may go to some specific sections, but if you wouldn't mind, so let me just ask. Let me just go to kind of question number one. What do you all think the level of detail of this should be? I mean, you've got the slide, kind of the vision, mission, goals, and objectives. Do you think that level of detail is what you would like to see? And I think part of answering this question and getting your feedback and making an informed decision on this really is going to guide the process of how information is collected, what information is collected. So I think it's an important piece to understand what your feedback is. I might suggest maybe if we even just do a round robin just to hear from everybody, because I think I'd like to hear from everybody, Chief, if that's okay with you. Not to put Mr. Matthew on the spot, but because you're on the end.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
you really want me to start that? Okay. I think I concur that I think that the format that was already written has been accepted. I think that there's definitely things in the ACS documents that could be incorporated. I don't think that we should get down into the weeds, particularly, especially in my constituents or EMS constituents. Delegated practice kind of keeps the actual practice at the local level. So I think that just from that perspective, I would rather see a systematic approach of the resources that might be available, but I would hate to try to dial down too small, because the more focused we get, the longer it will take to build consensus.
and can you give an example of when you say down in the weeds?
Well, okay, I got a perfect example. During the legislative session, there was a bill passed that says that county governments have to write letters saying that there is a need, or or there is not a need for an ambulance company to be licensed after our moratorium, okay? So one thing that the counties are focusing on is, what is the finite number? Somebody give me the X number per population for the appropriate number of ambulances. That is not how you answer that question. It is, you set the goals of the community, and the goals of the community dictate things that then get corresponded into how many ambulances it takes to meet those goals. So when you start talking about trauma systems, response times, those kind of things, those are going to have to be derived by what the locality can afford, can put in the infrastructure. And so just from an EMS perspective, if we try to get down too far and start answering finite questions like X ambulances per population, everybody here would have a different opinion. So
Okay.
I just want to try to keep a skeleton.
Okay, that's very helpful. Ms. Castanet?
I think it was like Brian said, we kind of have the foundation. Why reinvent it? Just soften it, or add to it. Just keep it, make it updated, I suppose. But not having to restart, and then here we are 3 months later, here we are, and we never get anywhere because we keep trying to flush things out, and then here we are a year later. We met in 2012, and here we are still trying to figure out this whole scenario. So keep it simple, kind of thing.
And so when you say foundation, you're thinking foundation that there is a strategic plan in place that can be used as a starting point. There's the ACS
Correct.
that can inform that process, and using that to move forward rather than just starting over.
In my opinion, for
Okay.
what it's worth.
Okay. Dr. Tyrock?
I think I sort of said most of the stuff already a while ago, but we already got a starting point. Now it's time to update and refine, but don't start from scratch.
Okay. Dr. Eastridge?
So, again, I'd echo what Ryan said, that I think we give them a broad overview of what to do, not how to do it, because it's going to vary from different locations and different, municipalities and rural and urban environments across the state. And again, I don't think the translation of the ACS document into our document is going to be, I think conceptually, I think I think that the way they've formatted it, the template they've given us, will actually marry up well with working, because there's not a whole lot of specificity in the document. It's just general best practice type principles from the long history of the ACS.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Beeson?
I'm too new to have an opinion, but I do. Yeah, I think the problem, or my concern I want to make sure that we focus on is, there's a lot of talk of trauma and ACS, but for most of us that's a small percentage of what we do. I think that ACEP's rating or evaluation, the ACS evaluation shows that we have no consistency in the state. And if we do anything, we need to set the baseline of what's expected. Because I said earlier in the medical directors committee today that, you know, EMS is the only practice of medicine where the patient doesn't have a voice. If you go into a hospital, there's, you know, a group of physicians that oversee credentialing of physicians, that oversee the quality and the direction of care. So there's somebody that has advocacy or voice for the patient. If you have a primary care physician, you don't like the way they practice, you can go find another primary care physician. But in EMS, you call a number or somebody activates the emergency services and you don't have a voice. And so if we do anything, we need to, not only in trauma, but in all aspects of what we do, set an example, baseline floor, evidence-based. You mentioned scene times or response times. No, we need, whatever we do has to be based upon evidence, and go from there.
Okay. Mr. Harbert, your thoughts on level of detail that this plan should reflect?
As an EMS educator, certainly we sometimes look at how are things being taught, what's missing, and I think I want to go back and look at best practice. Just because it's done somewhere else, and in Texas we're very, very proud of what we do, and someone starts to tell us, well, you didn't do that right, we get our hackles up. I think we don't want to get our hackles up. We need to look at best practice and see, is there something we need to change? Do we need to look at 773? Do we need the state trauma director? Do we need some of the recommendations that the ACS made? I know when this first came out, there was a little bristling of how can someone, you know, not from here tell us what we need to do. But I think as we go back and look at the trauma plan, to move away from anecdotal and look at what really works and what we can adopt. I'm kind of like the rest of them. I think we probably have a very workable document, but there are obviously some things that we need to go back, but not drill down too deep, but just make sure that we've covered the bases on anything new, anything left out, and anything that is not best practice.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Greenberg, what are your thoughts on level of detail?
Yeah, I agree with basically what everybody else has said, and I think if you want the document to be useful, you do avoid very detailed, very specific things, especially when you come to treatment modalities. I think the document quickly becomes out of date, and it becomes confusing. So, and I was just looking through both of the documents, trying to compare them, and I think we can take the two documents we have and start to meld them some. I think the level of detail is appropriate, and there may be some areas where we decide we're going to delve a little bit deeper, but I think that should be a conscious decision.
Chief Riley?
In terms of level of detail, I think the current plan is, as you mentioned, is pretty broad in some areas and very high level, and it's a very good document. So we need to get a little more detail than that. I guess what I'm looking at in the end is it's kind of the Goldilocks, not too much detail, but a little detail kind of thing, you know. So I just want it to be a document that a year, 18 months from now, a stakeholder, a patient, anybody, where are we going with EMS and trauma, they can look at it and read it and understand what needs to be done.
So with a focus on the future of what you want to achieve within, you know, whatever the next 5 years or whatever the length of that plan would be.
Right. Even if you can't, even if because of legislation or whatever we can't meet those deadlines, at least we've got some really solid targets.
Okay. Judge DeLoach?
I don't really have any more to add other than what everybody else has, and I'll agree with what they've said too. If it isn't broke, don't fix it.
Okay. Thank you, Judge. Ms. Dickerson?
I am the voice of the public, and I want whatever the plan is and the guidelines, because Texas is such a big state, that if I have an accident in Big Bend, I want as much of a chance to survive that as I do if I have a problem in downtown Austin. And whatever it takes for us to have a plan, and it doesn't, and the people who know how to make that work, and with the brain trust we have with all of our stakeholders and all the people up here, excluding me, should be able to come up with something. And I'm really, really optimistic on that. But I think the public just wants, because it is a big state, and we do have some areas that our stakeholders need more help in. So if we find an area, and I think the ACS was very helpful in that, pointed out areas that we need to find ways to help them to come up to a better level playing field for everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Dickerson. Ms. Schultz?
Well, I think everything has probably been said that needs to be said about it as far as the level of detail that we want. I certainly appreciate Linda's comments, and I think she's spot on. The one thing I think hasn't been mentioned maybe to me is that I think we need to make sure that we go back through the plan that we have and make sure that take the relevant pieces out of there that we need to keep, rather than just throw it out and strictly work with the ACS, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. So I think that would be my comment.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Picard?
Well, like Linda said, we have such a big state, and certainly one of the things that has concerned me all along is the diversity that we have in Texas from the standpoint of provision of care. We have pioneer counties that only have one paramedic, and so when we talk about best practices, and I really think a lot of this tracks back to education, but when we talk about best practices, we probably are defining best practice for the paramedic that's out there by himself versus the ones in Dallas County. And so there is naturally some diversity there, because we can only be as good as what we have in the way of transportation and equipment. But I think that this is a good document. It's survived obviously very well. I'd like to see a little more detail that maybe would relate to some of the underserved areas.
So just what I'm hearing is, and it's the challenge to meet the Goldilocks, I guess, end result. But what I'm hearing is, you want enough information in there to help the state move forward, but you don't want the plan to dictate necessarily how things would or should be done, but rather setting goals and objectives that then either local stakeholders or whomever could implement and move forward with this. Is that a fair kind of summary? Or and again, the reason I just want to make sure we're hearing you all correctly is because I think this again sets the framework of how you go about collecting the information and involving the public. But it sounds like you do not want a detailed document. But okay.
Not too much detail, anyway.
But enough detail to help you move forward.
Right. It has to be relevant to all the stakeholders.
Okay.
And not quickly outdated by changes.
So relevant, flexible, not quickly outdated, enough detail to be relevant to the stakeholders, recognizing the frontier, the rules, and the urban areas. Dr. Tyrock?
Just out of curiosity, why can't it be more of a living document? I mean, it took 12 years. I mean, I'm just asking. There's probably a good reason it can't be more of a living document.
In terms of like revisions and things of this nature?
Yeah, we keep saying getting outdated in a year or two. Why can't we make it a little bit more living? I don't know why.
Jane, I'll have to defer to you.
I think particularly, I think that's a great point, particularly if we do the ACS regional reviews, where I'll be sure that we would have some impact on this document subsequent to those reviews.
Well, I would think that would actually be one of the strategic plans, would be to complete those 22 regional assessments, and then from there see what needs to be, what's identified across the board as what we can work on, what we could accomplish quickly based on that feedback from those assessments. I guess it could be a living document. It's difficult to have a long-term strategic plan because of our 2-year legislative process. That can be a challenge. But I think if we don't have something that at least projects where do we want to be in 5 years, or what do we want to have, we think we want to have accomplished in 5 years, then it can it can just keep getting pushed off. So I think there's got to be a happy mix in there so that it continues to be a living document, because if we get the ACS regional assessments done, say it took 3 years to do all 22, then I would hope that we would come back together and look at those 22 and then make some plans for, say, 3 to 5 years down the road following those.
But won't this be part of our 2-year review of our strategic plan anyway? This will be part of that, so it will be a living document in a sense. It's going to be reviewed certainly sooner than 14 more years or 12 more years down the road. So, you know, I think, and yes, we do need the timelines, I think, but I think it still will be a living document if we stick to our strategic plan and review it.
Good point. Yep. I think the trauma strategic plan fell behind because the council didn't have a strategic plan. So.
Well, and I think another thing that you may consider in terms of kind of this living document piece of it is that because it's been the 12 years or so since this was last done, there's kind of a lot of work to kind of get it up to speed, so to speak. But you know, once you've gone through this process and you have the document that you feel that represents what you all want to achieve, then I think it does become a little bit easier. You know, it's kind of like, you know, painting your house. If you let your house go, you know, for 10 years or 15 years, then you got a lot of painting to do and wood to fix. But if you do it regularly, you can forestall some of those issues.
And the enabling legislation for the council did not specify what the strategic plan has to look like, or that it be living or not living. It can be what we want it to be. So I would concur it needs to be a living plan that's updated biannually or every 3 years, whatever.
Yes, sir. I actually have a process question. You know, since you said we're not going to actually do that here, you know, how do work groups function in the context of the Open Meetings Act?
With regard,
assuming we're going to charge a work group to, you know, foster this process, how is that sort of legally and ethically accomplished within the context of the, you know, the bounds we have to be in?
I would say probably offhand, it probably depends on what the plan is to actually create it. I think depending on the feedback today and working with Jane and her staff and with Chief Riley and then coming back to present to you all, my sense is that we would present a plan for you to consider to move forward with. And if that's the plan, having, you know, charging a committee to work on this or charging GETAC or however, I think we would spell out, you know, kind of those issues within that. So I think I don't know what I don't know because I don't know what that would look like pending the discussion today.
I think as long as we don't have a quorum of a committee or a quorum of the council, we can have ultimate work groups.
Okay.
That's what the work groups usually.
Right, and I do want to inject two things here.
Exactly.
In looking at the old plan on page 14, they listed all of the stakeholder organizations that took part, and it is very extensive. So I would start by saying, obviously they were successful in 2002, and while that was 12 years ago, some of the names that took part are still very active in our industry, and I wouldn't be afraid to ask them how they accomplished their work. You know, they say the last original idea was the wheel. All we need to know is how we need to retread this thing. So I would try to find out the processes they used and potentially the pitfalls they found so that we didn't, you know, do things the same way twice.
And based on this comment, with the permission of the chair, I think I'd like to move into some of these next questions because I think those are some things we want to understand from you all. And I think, Ms. Matthews, you brought up a good point that, you know, there are already stakeholders who were involved previously. How can they continue to be involved in this? So let me move to the next question, and I'm going to focus on the GETAC committees first before we come back to quote-unquote stakeholders more broadly, even though I think everybody, generally speaking, would be a stakeholder in this process. And I'm going to start with Ms. Picard just to allow you all to kind of even out the ability to go first on the round robin. But what and how should GETAC committees be involved in this development of the plan? I mean, do you have specific ideas about what their role would be, how they would be involved? I would just like to get your thoughts.
I don't know that I have one. I think as far as being involved in the plan, we certainly need to have opportunities for review and opportunity to make recommendations, I don't know that we need to be deeply into the decision-making process. That's off the top of my head.
Okay. And I should have said in the development of the plan. So, Ms. Schultz, what role do you see? I mean, how do you think that the committees ought to be involved in the development of this plan?
Well, you know, they have a huge stake in the plan.
Thank you, Judy.
They have a huge stake in the plan, because without their participation, it's going to be very difficult to meet our strategic plan, to carry out our strategic plan. So I think they have to be involved, and I think they have to be intimately involved. Now, does that mean the whole committee, everybody on the committee? No, I think, there's a process that we can use to make that happen, but I definitely think they've got to be involved.
Okay. Ms. Dickerson?
The committees are extremely important because they are really a group, a melting pot of all of our stakeholders from all different parts of the state. And like our education committee, when we were making changes in our thoughts of education, the education committee went out and went literally, how many places did you go?
23.
23, okay, 23 different places in the state to sample, to get consensus. And they brought that back to GETAC. Wonderful work. Another example I'm so proud of right now, I can't stand it, is what your committee has been working on changes with in the air, what's the name here? Air medical, and worked with trauma. And have, in the last, since November, has moved mountains. So I think we really have to have the committees involved. I think it's helpful. And we can use them as almost a pseudo work group, their ideas and things. So me personally, I think they're very important.
Okay. Judge?
I think our committees are our stakeholders, and I think that is they're made up of stakeholders, but that's basically the way we're supposed to work. When we have an issue, and I've mentioned this several times, when we have an issue or a problem that needs to be solved, our committees are the one that advise us for recommendations. So therefore, I think the committees made up of the stakeholders they're going to give us the information that we need to basically update this plan. Okay. And I believe that's where the information will come from.
Okay. Thank you, Judge. Chief?
Just echo what everybody else has said. The committees, I think, are going to be our a great source of information. That this is, to me, this is things that are just like Linda mentioned, the 23 visits around the state. They've almost been training for this type of activity, so definitely they need to be involved.
Okay. Dr. Greenberg?
Yeah, I think the best use for the committees is certainly at the very start and the very end. I think we need to have them look at their sections, quote, their sections, the parts they are most interested in, and have expertise in to kind of make sure we're on the right track, and maybe even to pull out some of the things that may be obsolete. And then as we come towards the end, we need to make sure that the committees look at it again to make sure the work product is appropriate. Of course, most of the work is going to be in the middle, and we'll have to figure out how to include them. But I don't think we can just, I hate to say it, dump it on the committees. But for sure, we need to have them at both ends of the spectrum. Okay. Make sure we start off on the right foot and end up on the right foot.
Okay. Mr. Harbert?
How do you say this differently? I think anyone who's purchased a home, you purchase a house, you look and you have to have inspectors come in. Someone's checking plumbing, and someone's checking electrical, and someone's checking foundation, and someone's checking the roof. When we look at our system plan, whether it's access to system or injury prevention or protocols or trauma facilities, whatever, we've got to have those committees, and we have to have those people come in and inspect that portion of that plan that they have to work with. They might have an outside expertise in multiple areas, but especially in their discipline, I think it's important that everyone gets a say to look at this plan and to have input on this plan that we're going to have to live with and try to implement over the next few years.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Beeson?
I think obviously the information, I look at it like an outline format. I think ultimately the outline is up to this committee. I think what goes and fills the information within the outline comes from the stakeholders. It's kind of like what the judge said. I think that's the important piece. If we, oftentimes we just listen to everybody's interest and their opinions, and things don't move forward because there's no unified map. So I think the ultimate map needs to come from this committee. I think the information that's filled in the map is going to be very important coming from the stakeholders.
Okay. Dr. Eastridge?
I would basically just echo what Jeff said. I think that we, apply the template, and then the utility of the committees is that's where our subject matter experts are, and they apply the appropriate granularity, and then it comes back to the council.
Okay. Dr. Tyrone?
I'm not sure how to say it any different than what these guys have said. Besides, I guess we're like the coach and they're the quarterbacks, the committees.
Ms. Castaneda?
I think that our committees are our workhorses. They're our eyes and ears, and I think it's real important that they're out there for us, and they get the job done, and they make us look good a lot of times, and so I think that's important.
Okay. Mr. Matthews?
Wow.
Could you say it another way?
Okay, let me think. Okay, hang on. I got a great
Unique
one.
response.
Use the Olympics. Right. No, I can't use the Olympics. I do think that the committees, one thing that the committees do have is they have far-reaching capabilities within each of their own disciplines. So it's anytime you have a project like this, you got to divide and conquer. And I think that it would be foolish for us not to include as many people as possible, because that just makes our work go by quicker and it makes it more accurate. So, I mean, I can't imagine not including the committees.
So it sounds like that everybody realizes the importance of the committees, the expertise that they have to offer in various parts of the timeline, including in the beginning, potentially in the middle, and also at the end. So those are helpful comments. I'm going to start in the middle. I'm going to start with Dr. Greenberg this time, just to mix it up here a little bit. So we've talked about the committees, their involvement in the development of the plan. We also have heard that in some of these past round robin comments that you think that the committees, really represent the stakeholders as well. But I'm going to ask you specifically about stakeholders unaffiliated with the committee structure itself. So, EMS or hospitals or traumas or whoever it would be out in the community. What do you think the role, or how should those types of stakeholders be involved in the development of this plan? And we'll move to Mr. Herbert to the whichever right or left. I can never do that backwards. My left.
Well, that's an interesting question, because if we're set up correctly, we actually should already represent who we think the stakeholders are. And if there's some other group out there, then that'd be the first step, is to realize we've been leaving somebody out all along. Okay. I looked at that list too on, I think he said page 14. It is an extensive list, but I think it pretty much covers everybody that's been involved in GETAC, either directly or indirectly, because we have a lot of organizations that have very far-reaching implications, even though there's just one person here from there. And if we're doing our job of taking that information back, I think everybody's involved. Probably, and I won't speak for Linda, but the consumer groups may be those organizations we don't represent as well. We tend to be representative of the medical community much more than the consumers. So that might be the biggest group that we need to pull in.
Okay. And one thing, I'll make an assumption, but I'll ask Chief Riley to confirm or not confirm it, whichever the case may be, but certainly there would be a proper public comment period as well. So I don't think by this statement that we're trying to remove that, but I just want to confirm that as well. Mr. Harvard?
I think most of us in our day-to-day practice, whatever it is, education, provider, owner, administrator, chief, whatever, we say it, but sometimes it's really hard for us to do it, and I think our main focus for this has to be the patient. are we creating a system that works best for the patient, not for us? And I think sometimes when we talk about the end user, none of us are really the end user. We're all providers. We all provide something, okay? And I think getting more input and more education for the consumer. Do they know the difference between a stroke center and a cardiac center? They know the difference between level 1, 2, 3, and 4 trauma center. Some of them don't care. They see hospital and they go. But we understand the difference, and I think sometimes from an education standpoint, we probably need to educate the public more on when to go, how to go, and what to go so they get the best bang for their buck. So for me, I think the end user, the consumer, is probably the one piece of this that we probably need to spend a little time with to ask them what they need, what their wants, what their perception is, and then educate them so that they use the system wisely.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Beeson?
Hey, you're just number 3. It's getting even harder for those guys.
Wait till you get to the other side of the room, too. So that's
I had one of those moments. What was the question again?
how
It had to do with stakeholders. Oh, is it committees and stakeholders? That's what it was. I was like, what the hell?
It's not being represented out there.
No, I think that if the committees are, appointed appropriately, which I believe they are, is that, as a committee member myself, I've always gone back to my area that I represent, obviously the specialty, but not just my personal practice, but others around. And I think that's what most of the committees are. Are there some with self-serving interest, of course, but I think the vast majority of them are representative of their areas. And we have representatives from all over, from north, south, east, west, rural, big city, small city, everything. And so that's the importance of the committees, and I think it's a pretty good representation.
Dr. Eastridge?
I already have nothing further to add.
Thank you. Dr.
I
Tyrod?
concur. Yeah, they've already answered it.
Ms. Castaneda?
I'm just hoping that if we're not representing someone well and there's enough knowledge out there that somebody can let them share with our RAC, let them share, but I'm assuming we're getting it out there.
Okay. Mr. Matthews?
Never know what's going on.
Wow. I don't know that I have too much to add except that honestly the unknown patient is who this is built around, and I believe we all could actually be a patient one day or will be. So whether it's a trauma system or not, so we just need to keep that in mind and do the best for the unknown. So, and that includes involving people.
Okay. Ms. Picard? It was between you and Judge Deloitte, and I just made to start, and we'll go back and we'll end with Chief Riley on this. What are your thoughts on how stakeholders, other than the committee, should be involved?
I work really hard to anticipate the. I feel like I represent here the volunteers, the largely fire department, EMS, and fire volunteers. And I thought that I had my finger on their pulse. I don't know that I necessarily do. I think better information in my case needs to be provided so that their opinion can be more informed. I agree that the committees largely represent the stakeholders, just like we do, but I wonder, given this plan, I guess my question really is, if that is the case, then do we need to address, excuse me, do we need to address in this plan specific things related to cardiac and stroke and education? And that starts getting really involved really quickly, so, and I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Schultz?
I need about 10 minutes to think about this to get my thoughts all together, really, because I think we have people, whether they're actually a committee member or not, that attend a lot of the committee meetings, and they come from all corners of our state, different sectors, even though they're all basically, most of them, I guess, are all healthcare workers of some kind. So I don't know whether, I don't know. I can only hope that with the number of people that we have attending these meetings, and that we'll have this information that we're working on and be helping us with it, I guess, that we'll be able to get the information to the greater number of people in the state. Other than that, I'm not sure what we do.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Dickerson?
There again, the public, and I think I agree with you, Jeff. You know, we need to reach out to the public, but Dr. Marburger, he has run the trauma triage committee, and they deal with all different disciplines, everything from undertakers to doctors, about what to do in a pandemic, how to take care of the public. I think we just have to try to address a strategy that we can deal with, and because all the public really wants is to be taken care of when they're having an emergency. And I think our stakeholders, that's what they all want to do, whether it's a pandemic or it's a heart attack or somebody's far away from home and needs to go back to their doctor. So I think just work on our strategy. The public will be happy with what we come up with, because all of us have family members who aren't in the business, and I'm sure that they will share with you what you need to know.
Thank you. Judge Deloitte?
One of the things that you know, to answer the question, how should the stakeholders be involved in the development of the plan? I think they're basically, the stakeholders are I mean, they're the ones going to be carrying out the plan in a lot of ways. However, I feel like that the public's got a dog in that fight as well. But I think this is, and I don't mean to bring this up the way that it's going to sound, but I also feel like that, you know, what works in Travis County is not going to work in Lamb County. First off, we can't afford it. And I think that's what part of our problem is now, is we have people from other parts of the world that are coming and telling us this is what we need and this is what we need to be doing, and we can't do that. I think but also, to answer the question, I feel like that the stakeholders in each individual community ultimately should have a great say-so in what they have in their area, and what the service, the level of care, whatever you want to call it, that they have in their area. And this, I think you get the gist of what I'm talking about. I'm not necessarily talking about the plan, but I mean, ultimately we are. I mean, that plan's what helps us get there. But I do feel like that, you know, I'm not one of those that subscribes to the theory that what's good for Travis County is good for Lamb County. Because I do feel like that the money's got to come from somewhere to support that. And, you know, but I think we should all be bought into our own destiny, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, sir.
I don't know that it did to me.
I think it's a mature reflection of the discussion that's taken place. Chief Riley, sir.
How should stakeholders be involved in the development of the plan is every way possible. Through the council, through the committees, through meetings around the state, SurveyMonkey, that's kind of what we're going to have to decide, is how and to what extent. Again, it's important, of course, everything, we need to really pay attention to all the stakeholders, because that's pretty much everybody, but we just don't want to get bogged down into trying to get too much input.
Sure. So let's go to the final question, and I'm going to start with Judge Deloitte, so I'll give you a fair warning here as I read the question, and then we'll go back around just the opposite way. So the ACS assessment has taken place. The RAC assessments are going to take place. We've talked a little bit about there are certainly things within the recommendations that the ACS has provided that can be used as a starting point. These assessments are taking place around the state. What are your thoughts on how these activities related to the ACS piece can help in the development of this plan?
I feel like that there is a barometer, or there's a bar, whatever you would want to say, that the new plan is going to be measured by. The only thing that we have to go is what the old one was measured by. So, you know, what the assessments say, basically that's where we need to start. I mean, when we start the plan, I mean that's where we need to start with what they're saying now, and then incorporate any new ideas or any new gauges, whatever you want to use. But I believe that it should give us a starting point of where we're not meeting up or where we're exceeding or whatever the case may be. But I just consider it to be a starting place.
Okay. Ms. Dickerson?
I pass.
Okay. And I appreciate you all bearing with me, but I think it's important for us as we're working with Jane to try to provide a development of a plan that's important to hear from everybody. So everybody may not have a comment to make, but I just think it's important for us to do this. Yes, sir, Dr. Tyrock.
Real quick, in regards to the ACS document, these are really just outside experts telling us what we already pretty much knew. So it's always good to have somebody an outsider who's an expert telling us stuff that we know. But I think we need to realize that their focus was just on trauma. We're talking about not just trauma, right? We're talking about EMS, cardiac, stroke. Is that correct, or am I wrong?
It's called the EMS trauma plan.
Because ACS is just trauma, if I recall. It has to be. It's being biased. So we need not just focus on the ACS document.
Okay, thank you. Let me go to Ms. Schultz, and we'll continue around. Ms. Schultz.
Well, I think the ACS document certainly will be a big help in putting the plan together. And deciding the things that we need to do. I think we are going to have to broaden that if stroke and STEMI and those things are not included, because it does include more than just trauma. We have that already. I think the RAC assessments, and my understanding is those RAC assessments are going to be done over the next couple of years, will be an ongoing process. I think those will probably be very valuable when we review this document in the future, and just help us update. But again, I think we need to make sure that we use what we already have and take the critical points from there, because I think there's a lot of things in there that are still very valuable that we need to use.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Picard.
I think both documents have the potential to cause us to expand the plan quite a bit. I know that just a personal example, in Dallas County, when we did the 12-lead activate or cath lab activation program, we had a nice grant, and we pretty much had a nice little package for Dallas County. But when we expanded it and the RAC took it over, there was an increased awareness of different issues that existed in Fort Worth and other parts of the Metroplex area. So, especially we have a lot of rural counties right around that area. So it was an entirely different picture. And so I think it's going to help us as they have a broader, these documents and the RAC assessments have a broader picture to present to us. It's going to cause us to, I think they'll be helpful, but we'll see some natural expansion of the plan if we include them.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Matthews?
Well, I think that both documents will be extremely helpful. I agree that the context of this plan may have to expand. And unfortunately, in EMS is a component of the trauma system, and the integration that's talked about in the previous plan hasn't necessarily been achieved completely. one of the things that we suffer in EMS is lack of really good quality data. A lot of our best practices are anecdotal. And so sometimes when you have experts from the outside come in and point out that maybe we're doing something that has been proven ineffective or possibly even dangerous, then those things help us lay the future out in a more directed way and get away from the anecdotal stuff. So unlike some aspects of medicine, EMS really doesn't have a long tried and true history of anybody measuring certain things that we do as far as field practices. So I would say that we would want to welcome any sort of an assessment or a best practice scenario in implementing this. Otherwise, we're not doing the best that we can with the knowledge that's available.
Okay. Ms. Castaneda?
I'm just going to say I'm not familiar with it enough on the documents to even voice an opinion on it.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Tyrod?
To clarify, Jane, the RAC assessments that are going to be coming up, those will be by the ACS, correct?
Correct.
And that'd be really, once again, I mean, it's good we're doing that. That'd be trauma specific. I recall, like, I think in 99 and 2000, we did the trauma service area, the RAC assessments. We may need to do something like that again just to see where we are, to look at the non-trauma aspects of each RAC to help revise and update the plan. I don't know.
Okay, the regional assessments that ACS would be doing along with the department would be related to trauma specific because it's off of that HRSA model.
Dr. Eastridge?
So, just historically, the ACS, Trauma System Evaluation and Planning Committee, has been doing this for states for about 5 or 6 years. And they do this without really having a dog in any individual fight. So it's really, they're an impartial reviewer of sort of how you do things and how you could potentially improve. With that being said, they've also been very successful at looking at states that have really the same issues that we have in the state of Texas, with the big municipalities and the vast expanse of rural communities. That's true in 75% of the United States, have the exact same issue. So I think using these documents and really using these documents with our document as a template and then taking those realistic concepts out of the ACS document and applying those to the document we already have is probably I would see as an optimal use of those documents and those recommendations.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Beeson?
Yes.
Very, very concise and cogent. Mr. Harbert?
If we go back and look at the mission of EMS and Trauma Systems Strategic Plan, and the actual mission statement says to promote, develop, and maintain a comprehensive EMS trauma system that will meet the needs of all patients and that will raise the standards for community health and health care by implementing innovative techniques. And I think that's what we're really going to have to look at in this new plan. What's innovative? What's new? As I mentioned earlier with Ryan, not anecdotal, but what's best practice somewhere else? Again, we're Texans, don't tell us, but sometimes I think we have to listen and say, if it worked for you, let's try it here. Certainly if we keep doing the same old thing, we'll get the same result. So whatever delivery we end up with, we want to make sure that we're trying to take care of that entire population. So I think when we raise the standard and be as innovative as we can using every resource, RAC, experts, everybody, hopefully we'll be able to merge those two plans and come up with something that'll work in Lamb County as well as something that will work in Dallas County.
Thank you. Dr. Greenberg?
Well, since everybody else talked about how to use it, I'll say how we shouldn't use it. Okay. And hopefully it's not going to be a cut, copy, and paste. I mean, I think we need to use those other documents and those other looks as a basis for what we come up with, but not just, doing the Reader's Digest model. Okay. And besides, everybody else already said what I wanted to. So.
Chief Riley?
What they all said.
So what we're hearing is that there is value in both the ACS assessment and the RAC assessments. We need to incorporate where appropriate, but also making sure that it's just not a copy and paste job. So I think what I would ask for, with permission of the chair, is just open up for any additional comments that you all may have as the council, and then after that, I would suggest maybe to the chair that you might would like to take public comment on this discussion. Are there any other comments, things that you think we need to look at, not look at, be wary of?
I mean, the issue has been raised when we talk about this, and I'm not sure exactly what it says in our plan for how we're supposed to do this plan, but is it supposed to include STEMI and stroke and all EMS and emergency hospital services, or are we actually supposed to be restricted? And I'm looking at Jane.
Jane.
Well, we don't have the STEMI in our statute. We have stroke, we have EMS, and we have trauma. I don't know how to answer that, actually.
Can I fudge it?
Sure, go for it.
EMS has to deal with stroke and cardiac, and EMS is part of the EMS and trauma system plan. Is that close enough?
Sounds rational.
I mean, we use the same ambulance.
You do?
Scanner, we use this, yeah.
What other comments?
I do think that in reading this document, I would ask that all the committee members go back and read the document and compare it to what you know to be true today, because I've scanned through here and there's a lot of really good recommendations that died, and I would hate for us to basically, bring up those same things. So I think if we learn from the history of this document 12 years ago, there are things in here that called for EMS as an essential service. That never moved forward. It called for dispatch by qualified people, not just a phone call taker. That never happened. So there were some really good forward-thinking things, and I think that we need to address not just the plan, but exactly how is it that we're going to push forward to implement those things, because we can have all the plan that we want, but if we don't have, once the battle plan's drawn up, we got to put boots on the ground, and we got to figure out how that's going to get done. And there's some really good things that were in here that obviously should stay, but that were never implemented. So I would ask that everybody read that thing and take note of the disparity between what's still happening today with what was advised in the current plan.
And you may also wish to consider when you do that is think about if something did not get implemented, why did it not? Because I think that's going to help, in some of the discussions about if you still think it's important and you want to move forward with it, is just trying to maybe do a reality check of what were the reasons why. So you may want to consider that. Chief Riley, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
At this time, if there's any public that would like to come forward and make any comments, or perhaps if there's anyone who's worked on the plan before would like to make any comments.
We ran out of public.
Yeah. I think we're...
We ran out of public.
So I get really fired by my boss. But I would only suggest one other document that's out there, and it's a dated document, but it's still valued today, and that's the EMS Agenda for the Future for 1996. It has 14 components in there that I think everything that we do in EMS or in trauma can fit right into that. I mean, it has all the components. So as we look to build our future, and you've heard me speak, I think, so you have the EMS Agenda for the Future on national goal. What we see at the state level it's a simple four things: recruitment, retention, recognition, and reimbursement. And then you get down into more of the day-to-day operations kind of things. But I think I did hear earlier, let's not write the book and tell them exactly what to do. And I can't agree more with you, Ryan, that we have to also look at the plan that we already have and keep what's good that we didn't touch and try to push it forward. So if we're sitting here for 4 hours, I had to say something. Could you send Joe Schmidt the document?
It's online.
The one you just mentioned.
EMS Agenda for the Future?
Yeah.
Yes.
Agenda for the Future.
EMS Agenda for the Future.
Yeah.
If you just Google it, it comes right up.
Yeah.
Don't look, you can look at it, it's put out by NHTSA back in 96.
And the white paper
And
came out.
the the registry has it.
EMS Agenda for the Future. It does advocate a few things that are kind of oil and water with Texas.
It's a great document.
I don't have any other comments. It appears the public did not overwhelm us with their comments.
Chief, can I say one thing here that's
Sure.
in the document here is what I just want us to keep in mind. It says the goal is sophisticated clinical care system, and I'm now stopping between the system. That could be cardiac, stroke, trauma, pick it, whatever. Going back now to the statement, is to standardize treatment based upon solid medical evidence so that patients can expect quality of care no matter where they are in the state. I hear all the time, well, I'm here, I'm there, and you have something in Dallas or Fort Worth that we don't have in Marfa. But last time I checked, human anatomy was the same in Marfa as it is in Texarkana. And we need to standardize and fix a lot of our, I think that'll fix a lot of our issues.
So, Chief, if I may, just in lieu of time, I know we've run over a little bit, but in thinking about tomorrow's agenda, I think the last thing that we have on our plate is to think about, are there additional overall goals from this discussion today? Is this something that you would like to entertain now, a discussion on, or would you rather defer that until tomorrow?
Based on the discussion on Goal E, how much more time do you think we need to take care of that tomorrow would be the question.
I don't think we have anything else on Goal E. I think this is the feedback that I think that we were seeking on Goal E, so I don't think there's any other need except for...
So then what is the next step in relation to Goal E would be the question.
The next step in relation to Goal E, I'm gonna kind of defer to Jane as I say this, but I think you all provided a lot of feedback today. I think what we would like to do, at least in this part of the process, is update the strategic plan generally based on your feedback for the other goals, but with Goal E specifically is develop kind of a document, if you say, I don't know, maybe a 5-pager or something along these lines, based along the questions that you've asked, and to lay out a proposal for DSHS and for the council to consider on how to move forward. But I'll ask Jane if that's what she had in mind. Should have asked you probably before I said
it. There you go. I think that's reasonable. I mean, if we bring back to you what we've talked about today, laid out so you can see this is how, and then talk about how we do it. Because what I heard today is that we want lots of stakeholder involvement. We want those entities that participated in 2000. There's lots of them. How do we go about doing that? I mean, that's a huge undertaking. So I can't answer that off the top of my head. I think we need to see it all distilled down into this is what we're looking for, and then figure out how we get there.
So then we would have another council meeting either in May or between now and May where we might get some sort of guidance, or I'm trying to figure out how to get the ball rolling, basically.
Right.
One thing that we need is the ACS surveys of the 22 racks, which doesn't sound like it's going to be done for up to 24 months, right? And so I don't know how you incorporate those findings in a document without the findings.
When does the RAC survey start by the ACS?
We don't have a schedule yet. We're still working on the formulating the question set and working through the BIS tool.
I would submit that that's just a component of the strategic plan as these surveys are being done.
Correct.
And 3 years from now, it'll be time to update the plan anyway, and then we'll have the results of the surveys.
Right.
That's my guess.
I think that's probably a pretty good guess.
You think we'll have the plan done before the surveys start? Probably.
That's kind of up to us.
Well, it may be better to have the surveys after the plan is in place. Yeah.
I guess that's something to consider. Do you?
The ACS is pretty backed up. I'm on the Trauma System Committee. They're fairly backed up.
Well, we're doing a collaborative agreement with them so that we're actually going to partner with schools of public health and bring in grad students or doctoral students to help go through the assessment piece and create the assessment. The ACS would then come back in and do the consultative piece. So it's there's not quite as much on the ground time for the ACS survey group. So that cuts down a little bit, but it's still a huge undertaking. Trying to do them together is something else. Boy, I think I'll retire. No, I'm not sure I can answer.
Are we
how we do
legislatively
it.
mandated to have it done by a specific time?
the EMS trauma plan?
The update of it, yeah.
No, I don't think so, Ryan.
Because, I mean, if it
better
was,
go
somebody missed a due date at some point with 12 years having gone by.
At least one.
It says once every 24 years.
There you go. Well, we're only halfway there then.
There you go. There you go. I mean, if we're looking at coming together, are y'all thinking that we come together in a big group and do this? Do we do it, somehow start out?
Can I throw out
Electronically.
something, being that
Sure,
we're leading into
please
the
do.
legislative session? This document, and this is just my cursory look at it, but to be honest with you, I've never read it cover to cover. There are a lot of things in here that still need to be done that are relevant. So if we're wanting to move forward, because the document doesn't save a life, the actions resulting from the document saves lives. So why don't we have a strategic plan that we do everything we can to see the rest of this document implemented? And once we've gotten rid of all the good ideas and got them in place, then we can start adding to it. But it sounds to me like we would be frothing up a bunch more work when there's still work to be done. So I'm just wondering if there's not something that we can't do. Start right now with a plan on how we can partner with people leading into the next legislative session, look at the things that need to be done, start trumpeting the things that have not yet been done, and use the ACS survey because it is finished, but it could be a component of that. It's ammunition for the things that still have not been done. Because I would hate to see that we could add 20 more items that need to be done, but we got things that are 12 years old that still haven't been championed.
And Ryan, I agree with you 100%. That's why I said I think we need to use this 2002 document because there's lots of good stuff in there, and I don't think we want to throw that out at all. We have the assessment, the things on there that we need to add to our strategic plan. I think we can do, and then I think the RAC assessments that they're going to do over the next couple of years, because they still have to formulate that whole assessment tool and then do the assessments. So it I think could easily be longer than 2 years before they're done, but we will be updating our document. We will put into our rule that we will update our strategic plan every 2 years. So there's really no reason that I can see that we would want to wait until those assessments, the RAC assessments, are done before we finish this document. I hope we can get it done in 2 years. Just my thoughts.
What I'm hearing from at least a couple of council members, maybe more, is we ought to take the plan we have and review it and add to it.
Yeah.
And we probably already have most of the topic areas, and then that document will be sitting there pending the results of the RAC surveys in 3 years, and then it'll be time to look at those areas again or even add to it more. So I'm seeing some head nods. Or
I'm looking through the document, sprinkled through there, as you can see, there's a lot of, it says strategies and there's due dates. Has anybody even gone through the document? I know some of these weren't done. Has anybody looked at them and said, October 1st, 2004, this is supposed to be done, this is supposed to be done? Has anybody looked at that? And that's something we need to have in the new document, I think, is you got due dates. These are action dates. Were they done? If not, why not? And what's going to happen? That may be a good start to do back on this one to clean up those due dates that have, come and gone.
So a couple thoughts.
Accountability with that.
So a couple thoughts related to this piece of the discussion. So it sounds like, and again, just kind of reiterating, there's a document that's in place, making sure that the baby's not thrown out with the bathwater, so to speak, that document is being used to move ahead, using the ACS components as appropriate to move ahead. Are you saying that you think that just looking at this document and updating this document rather than trying to kind of update it, the 2014 version, or is it just kind of implementing the 2002 version? That's where I'm a little confused at this point in time.
It has to be updated. It has to be updated.
It has to be updated.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have to.
well, yeah, we don't have the authority to implement or go to legislation or anything like that. But we need to update what we've got and make it more relevant to today, and then other people can take that document and use it for legislation or whatever else we need.
To support the cause, so, okay, all right, that's very helpful. Chief Riley, I think also to get back to your other question in terms of, you ask, kind of what's the next step with this process, and particularly with Goal E, I think, we'll provide kind of a summary of this discussion and a proposed plan of action that we would submit through Jane that would then come back through to the council for consideration. I don't think it'd be the May meeting that would take that long. I don't think it would be tomorrow morning, but to have this by 11. So I think there's a median somewhere, but
I need it 14 days ahead of the meeting.
We could have it to you 14 days ahead of the meeting, but so I'm kind of hedging the bets. But I would say perhaps you may want to consider another interim council meeting or something along those lines.
Yeah, because I may be speaking out of turn, but in my position on this council, I don't see how we can wait to meet in May and then August and have any hope of getting this thing moving at all, within any reasonable time frame. So, is the council amenable to a possible meeting between now and May the 16th, whatever date that is? Is that? Okay.
So we'll work with you all on this. Okay. And then I guess for your consideration, Chief Riley, then the final order of business would be, would you like to talk just very briefly about any new goals for the council strategic plan, or would you like to defer that until tomorrow?
I don't know. Y'all help me out here. I'm kind of saying let's wait till tomorrow.
Let's wait till tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it from our perspective.
Okay. All right. Thank you for guiding us through this. It's not complicated, but it certainly is complex. And Dr. Greenberg, by the way, contacted the governor's office and got a reply that they are not doing orientation for new members in the same way that some of us went through and did that. And it's up to the it's up to the department, the agency, to conduct those orientations.
One more thing.
Yeah. So that answered that part of our strategic plan. So I think we've closed public comment, and now how do we do this? Do we adjourn this meeting or recess this meeting till the morning?
You can adjourn because you
Okay.
have another.
Okay,
agenda.
that's right. We have another separate posting. Any other comments from council? Any other comments from the public? Okay, I'll hold this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
9.
9.
Be there with bells on.
EMS innovation,
Innovation. Renovation.